Hi, I'm Dave, founder of Halloween Year Round, and today I'm talking about the first season of Dexter Original Sin, the prequel to the serial killer phenomena of the 2000s and 2010s. Look, I was a huge Dexter fan. I had thoughts about its original ending, and then I was excited for New Blood. Kind of had thoughts about that ending, and then, much to my surprise, I realized they're doing not one but two spin off shows. One sort of a young Dexter in the vein of young Sheldon, only with much more murder, and the upcoming Dexter Resurrection. So I had initially planned on doing a weekly review of each episode. Now, if you look back, I did review the first episode, Original Sin. I was not a fan. I held off doing weekly reviews, though, firstly because with everything else on the channel, I just didn't have time. But also, I didn't want to kind of just go week after week saying the same thing. And I thought, it is kind of getting better in some respects. So let me wait until the end of the season. And I did, aside from the Where's Tom Matthews video, which we'll get to, and I'll put a link in the description. But now that we're at the end of the season, I feel vindicated in saying that number one, why was this series even made? Number two, why do they hate the original series so much? Now, I know both of those sound inflammatory, and I'll get to what I mean by them. First things first, though, let me talk about the things I liked about Dexter Original Sin, because I don't want people to come and say, "Oh, well, you're just a hater. You just didn't like the show. You just ranted about." No, I'm looking at it as objectively as I can, as a fan of the original Dexter and as a fan of, well, movies and TV in general. And there were things I did genuinely like about it. Primarily, the cast is amazing. Patrick Gibson captures the essence of a young Dexter without ever feeling like he's trying to imitate Michael C. Hall. He makes the character his own, and I buy that he is a younger version of the character. He has the little mannerisms, but it doesn't feel like an impersonation. And that is such a hard thing to do, and he pulls it off perfectly. I also really, really like Christian Slater as Harry. I know that it feels like a different version than we saw in the original series, but we have to remember we've only ever really seen Harry from Dexter's subjective perspective. We've never really seen him portrayed in an objective manner. And it was really cool to see that and see how kind of complex and, shall we say, morally gray he always was. And while I know in my original review of the first episode, I said that Deb and Masuka felt like they were SNL impressions of their original actors, I think as time went on and as the season went on, I grew to really like both of them, and how everyone, especially the younger versions of classic characters, looked and sounded like younger versions, but made it their own and made it interesting. So I love the cast. You could not have cast this better. And then even with the newcomers who were not based on, characters we knew already, Sarah Michelle Gellar's great. Looking forward to the Buffy reboot whenever that happens. And Patrick Dempsey, I mean, look, I love Scream 3. He's great in it. And if we're not going to get him in Scream 7, it's still fun to see him in this. But I'll get to what they did with his character, but whatever I end up saying about his character, let the record show I like Patrick Dempsey as an actor and his performance. The other thing I really, really like about the show is it resisted the urge to shove its time period down the audience's throats. And what I mean by that is there's a certain sci-fi Netflix series that, you know what I mean, they're like 80s, 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 80s. And it's like, we get it. You're set in the 80s. You don't need to throw every single neon colored piece of clothing and every single movie poster, even though it makes no sense for this character to have an Evil Dead poster because the general public didn't really even know about that movie at that time. It feels like they went overboard with it. And with Dexter Original Sin, while it is set in the early 90s, it never feels like that's the gimmick. it feels, well, there's a different gimmick, but it feels like, hey, this is just our show that happens to be set in the early 80s. Yeah, it's going to feel like, or the early 90s. It's going to feel a little bit like Miami Vice at times, but it's never that overt. And I like that it showed restraint in there. And a lot of TV shows, especially ones set in, earlier decades, don't do that. Let's get into the problems. Ultimately, when it comes to Dexter Original Sin, its issues can be boiled down to two big problems. The first is Prequel-Itus, and the second it's the continuity. And I'm sorry, I know people are like, oh, why are you such a stickler for continuity? There's a reason, and I'll get to it. First, let's talk about Prequel-Itus. There are two types of Prequel-Itus, benign and malignant. Now, as a medical doctor, let me define what I mean by that. Prequel-Itus is when you have a prequel to a popular IP that feels the need to just add references for the sake of adding references, for the sake of people going, hey, that's that character or that setting. For example, why is Jabba the Hutt running the pod race in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace? Prequel-Itus. Why is it in the first episode of Better Call Saul, Saul Goodman, or Jimmy McGill, just so happens to meet Tuco Salamanca? Prequel-Itus. Why did Dexter Original Sin feel the need to include Brian Moser? Prequel-Itus. Now, like I said, not all Prequel-Itus is bad. Some of it is benign. So, for example, you have the random inclusion of Miguel Prado in a brief cameo. Maria LaGuardia says that she's dating him and he's going to law school and he wants to be district attorney one day. That's fine. That's a fun little reference that doesn't take away anything and it doesn't mess with anything. So, in those instances, I'm fine with it. It's fine. We can all be like, oh, cool, that's Miguel Prado. Even if they had like a random, like, if Deb's in high school, if they had dropped a reference to, oh yeah, Mr. Mitchell who teaches history, whatever, as a reference to Trinity, that would have been fine because at that time it makes sense for those characters to be there. But when you get into malignant Prequel-Itus is when you get into the aforementioned, why does Brian Moser have to be part of this season? Well, because for starters, he's the most popular character or the most popular villain from the entire series, tied with Trinity. And in doing so, it brings us to the second issue, the continuity, because they're kind of one and the same. The problem with Dexter Original Sin is that it breaks that continuity. You have a beloved series that has a very well established lore that very painstakingly in detail goes into different things. So it begs the question, if this series is truly meant to precede the original Dexter, what was Brian Moser up to during all those years in between? I mean, we see him killing people, and we're to believe that Harry Morgan just kind of, well, stop doing that and just kind of lets him go. And what's he doing for the next 15 years? And then why does he randomly decide in 2006 to finally start chopping people up and trying to get Dexter's attention when we knew he was stalking him all the way back in 1991? If Captain Aaron Spencer was in fact a serial killer and we knew that he had killed that other kid and kidnapped his own son, why is it in 2007 when they're looking for the Bay Harbor Butcher and Frank Lundy suggests it's someone in law enforcement and not everyone's like, what? I don't believe that. Instead of, hey, remember about 15 years ago when the captain of Miami Metro Homicide was involved in stuff like this? Because they didn't know the character then. Thirdly, or C, for those paying attention and who can spell, Brian Moser lived with Harry and Harry's wife, I forget her name. That wasn't part of the story. It would be interesting if he had mentioned that to his brother, like, hey, I was taken in and they kicked me out. Like, that's kind of an important part of the story. And D, or 4, for those still paying attention, we learned in season 2 that Harry was appalled and horrified when he saw firsthand what Dexter was doing and that it caused him to intentionally overdose on his medication and die. Except this series shows him kind of in the thick of it and fully aware of it. And not that he wasn't always fully aware of it, but he clearly sees what's happening. And Dexter even like ties him up in it. And he never like where does that take place? And again, these aren't just minor details. You could argue that, Brian Moser living with, the Morgans briefly, that's just a minor detail. And okay, fine, I will cede you that. But the whole cause behind Harry's death is kind of a big deal and kind of a huge important plot point in the original series. And this show just kind of forgets about it. And if they want to get to it at a certain point, we're long past that point because the flashback, remember the one where Deb had the awkward glasses? Tom Matthews, who I'll get to, tells Harry that the guy got away, and it's when Dexter is killing that guy that Harry walks in on it, sees what he's doing, and then decides to overdose on his own medication. When does that scene take place? Because Deb is supposed to still be in high school at that point, and now she's going to the Miami Metro Police Academy, and Harry's alive to see that? That doesn't make sense. And finally, number 5, or E, for those who can still spell, where's Tom Matthews? I did a whole video on it, so I'm not going to get that much into it. I'm just going to say that when I made that video, everyone said, just wait, just wait. He'll be revealed at the end of the season. He'll take over after Spencer goes away. Well, the season's over. We still haven't seen Tom Matthews. We still don't know why he's mysteriously absent. We know that he should be around in the 70s flashbacks because he says point blank to Deb that he was there when Harry got back from that crime scene. And we know, again, he should be the lieutenant right now. And the fact that Spencer is intentionally the captain, it begs the question, why are they never showing their lieutenant? Why exclude him at all? It feels like a weird thing to do. Ultimately, my problem with Dexter Original Sin is that when you are going to do a prequel, when you are going to borrow the fan loyalty of a beloved IP, there is a certain responsibility to maintain. I know what everyone's going to say. Come on, you don't be such a buzzkill. It's just don't think about that stuff. But it's that stuff that matters. Because you could have just done an early 90s Miami set crime thriller series, whatever. But when you're making it Dexter, you are taking on the responsibility of the continuity of that franchise. So, yes, you should be held to a higher standard than, say, an original movie or show. And that's the problem, is that at the end of the day, it feels like this was the only reason for this series to exist was so they could continue the original show. And what I mean by that is, where is Dexter at the end of New Blood? Well, spoilers, he's not dead. And we know that we're going to get a sequel series in Resurrection. But you know what we can't do in Resurrection? We can't have him back working at Miami Metro doing the same thing, being the serial killer Bay Harbor Butcher, because, well, they know it's him now. And I'm genuinely interested and excited to see where Resurrection goes because that's now uncharted territory. Now, I would much prefer, instead of an entire TV show, say a 2-hour TV movie simply called The Trial of Dexter Morgan that serves as a sequel slash epilogue to both New Blood and the original series. But we'll see what Resurrection has in store. Despite my thoughts of Original Sin, I believe Resurrection deserves a fresh chance and deserves us to go in and judge it on its own merits. So, with that all being said, Original Sin is Showtime's and Paramount Plus's sneaky way of just doing more seasons of Dexter, but as the Dexter we want, the one who's actively killing people, the one who's, hiding in plain sight, working at Miami Metro. It's their sneaky way to basically just do the same show, but, well, we made everybody younger because that continuity we couldn't break. And it feels like, look at Original Sin. What does it do that differently from the original series? Not much. It's sorta like just the same thing. Even Miami Metro, The Office looks exactly the same because that was always its goal, to take Dexter and continue with him doing what he does best purely for fan service because they're like, "Oh, we can't we everyone knows it's him now. We ruined it." Well, wait a minute. What if we just make him younger and do the same damn show? Again, when you take on the responsibility of doing a prequel, you have to sort of justify why you're doing it. Are you taking a side character from a beloved movie or show and showing their origins? Because again, we already knew Dexter's origins pretty well. The original show kind of demonstrated that pretty well for us. So the only other reason to do Original Sin is not to show Dexter's origin or show like how he became who he was. We knew that already. It's merely to keep doing the same show as the original series, but loophole, he's younger, it's all flashback. We can run this potentially for a good 5 to 10 years if we wanted to. And Michael C. Hall, look, I love the guy, but let's not pretend that his heart is in Dexter anymore. And do you know why I know that? Because I know where his heart is. It's in his band, Princess Goes, which my wife is a huge fan of. We saw them in concert over the summer. And I can tell you from seeing him in person performing, I saw the passion that I don't see in any interview he's done for Dexter Original Sin or Dexter Resurrection, which leads me to believe that the only reason he's doing it is because it's a nice paycheck that supplements him being able to do what he's actually passionate about, his music career. So, one artist to another, respect, and I'm happy for Michael C. Hall as a person that he gets to do that, but it doesn't make Original Sin a better show. And I feel like at this point, I'm just talking in circles. So, hey, this is just my review. This is just my very long rant. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments. What am I wrong about? Come at me. It's what YouTube is for. Like, share, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. If you don't, you may end up getting your life story completely retconned because the network wants to continue doing the show, but they can't do it anymore because of what they made the ending of the last season. And as always, every day is Halloween.